In the United States and worldwide, human trafficking is a social ill, devastating millions of lives. Children and adults are sold on the streets. To make matters worse, many cases go unreported. On today's program, our guests will explain the nature of this secretive crime, how it can be identified, and what they're doing to rescue the innocent. Stay tuned for this two-part series on human trafficking and how you can help victims.
Just who I am, to know it's you I want. Hold me, 'cause I'm sinking in the mud after the rain. Oh, yeah, take me to the middle of the earth and teach me there. Oh, fly me, yeah, like a kite up in the
Rise during the night and cry out. Pour out your hearts like water to the Lord. Lift up your hands to him in prayer, pleading for your children, for in every street they are faint with hunger. We want to welcome you to the Everlasting Love program. And every time we do these programs, we want you to know that God loves you with an everlasting love. Whatever situation you may be encountering in your life right now, whatever struggles, whatever your past, God wants you to know that all you've got to do is call on him. His word says that if you call on him, he will answer you. During the course of the program, you'll see our number on the screen, 773-286-2172. Also our website, www.everlastinglovetv.com. If there's anything on the program that interests you, if you have a prayer request, if you're looking for a good church or a Bible study, or if you just need some help in any way, please give us a call, drop us a line. We would definitely get back with you and hopefully provide you with the resources that you need. We've been doing these shows for several years now, and I'm always amazed at the different topics that we've been able to talk about on the program, and our guests, and just the choices that they've made in their lives to serve different people in the community, different people in our culture, in our nation, that are struggling. Topics that you may have very little knowledge about. Today's program, and actually we're doing a two-part series, is on human trafficking. And I want to introduce our guests. And so with me is David Lippiett. Did I say that right?
You did.
I did. Is that French or?
It's not. It's actually English.
Oh, it's English. Sorry. I apologize to the French for that. Okay. Diana Graham and Brenna Sear. Okay, did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Great. So all three of you are here on the program today to talk about a very serious issue that is happening internationally, and that is the issue of human trafficking. And we've also got some artwork that's up here on the set today, and Diana's going to talk to us about that and how that sort of fits in to all of this. But before we actually delve into the meat of the topic, I'd like for each one of you to share a little bit about your personal lives and what drew you to human trafficking. And so Brenna, I'm going to put you on the spot and start with you first.
So I'm from the Twin City area. I was born and bred there as a Christian. Rose up following Jesus from a very young age. I just recently graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a degree in Languages and Cultures of Asia. I kind of speak Hindi. I'm in love with India, and next year I'm actually going to be going to India with a fellowship to study Hindi for a year. I got interested in human slavery, human trafficking, human slavery, the same thing, when I was in elementary school. It started with mostly of a historical American South slavery, but also I was interested in the slavery that was going on in Sudan. And as I learned more about that in middle school and high school, I learned more about the sex trafficking that's going on, and the slavery of the agricultural fields and all the other type of fields that is really ingrained in our world. And that's how I got into the issue of human trafficking.
Well, I think it's so commendable that a woman as young as you has such a passion for such a difficult issue like human trafficking, and that you're willing to turn your life in a direction to be able to minister, or to be able to be used by God for this.
It's a difficult problem to ignore.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. And Diana, can you talk a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, I've been a special ed teacher now for 15 years in the elementary setting.
And I commend you for that, because that's not my calling at all. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm an artist. So I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, in that area my whole life. And I came to know the Lord when I was in middle school. through my aunt, who was under Chuck Colson's ministry, prison ministries, and but didn't actually start following the Lord until I was in college and really walking out my faith and living out my faith. And so that's kind of my story. And then as far as getting involved with ending slavery and human trafficking, I actually took a missionary class on missions. And in the class, the instructor, actually, David here, talked about human trafficking and slavery at the time. And I really thought it was, for the most part, abolished at that time. And I was 37 at the time when I found out. And I just, everything within me wanted to get involved. And so the last 4 years, I've been on a journey to study and to learn more about it. We've been on a missions trip to Thailand and Cambodia, and out of that we did, myself and another artist did a series of paintings, 15 paintings, and we're trying to do art shows to bring awareness around it.
Wow.
And also hoping for the opportunity to educate around that as well, young people and college-age students, high school and college-age students.
Yeah.
So that's kind of
what a great way to use your talent, your artistic ability to actually stand for something and to bring awareness around this topic. And a special ed teacher, boy, you got a lot going for you over here. I mean, you work with 3rd and 4th graders, so God bless you. Yeah. David, tell us a little bit about you. Oh, Englishman. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I became a Christian while I was in college, and it was a whole series of events, like a lot of us in our faith journey, and came to the point where I needed Jesus in my life. And from that point, it's always funny how our lives take various turns. And I did computer consulting for a while. I was in youth ministry for a while. In 1998, my wife and I kind of took inventory of how we're living our lives, and kind of really hoping for more. I mean, living in the suburbs, kind of wondering, like, is this all there is? Accumulating stuff, and we knew that there was more for us. And so we went to England, did some training there. It was really a break, really away from just our culture and lives. And then we went to Africa and did work, and it was throughout the course that we just really felt God's nod of approval, just God's smile on us. And it was really an eye-opening experience for us to be confronted with the amount of poverty that's going on in the world, the amount of injustices that are going on in the world. And I think it's kind of like The Matrix, the movie The Matrix. Like, once your eyes have been opened, there's no going back. And I think that once your eyes have been open to the issues of global poverty, of injustice, like human trafficking, I think there's really needs to be a response as a believer. I think there's a moral responsibility on all of our part to respond to the issues out there, and oftentimes we might give mental assent to the sadness of it or the wrongness of it, but to actually do something is often lacking.
Right. So then tell us, what are you doing about it, and the folks that are with you today as well.
Right. Yeah, we're all from We International, as you've said, and there's a number of ways that organizations address human trafficking, and We International has chosen to address mostly human trafficking on the global front. Our head is around it a little bit domestically, but as far as like working to do something outside of raising awareness of the issue, we mostly focus internationally.
Okay, so let's talk about what human trafficking is, because we may have folks that are watching that have an idea, but let's really break it down for them.
Okay. Yeah, human trafficking is someone being coerced or defrauded, manipulated into being the property of another individual. So slavery is alive and well today, unfortunately. It's one of the great tragedies of our time. I feel like no man should own another human being. There's there's an estimated 30 million people that are enslaved globally today. There's estimated million people a year that are coerced or defrauded into being trafficked. So that could be trafficked for sexual purposes or labor purposes. The child soldier situation happening globally is a huge issue. I know.
The what?
Child soldier
Okay, can
problem.
you explain that?
Various armed rebel and militia groups will often abduct children to fight for them. And the children are often forced to kill their own family members, such as the case in like northern Uganda is a prime example. You know, lots of people have become more familiar with recently of the LRA in northern Uganda, northern Congo, abducting children, and the children are forced to often kill their family members. The young girls that are abducted are often forced to become sex slaves of the soldiers, or cooks or porters. So it's another form of, you know, what you'd fall under slavery, that people are being forced or really owned, manipulated by another human being.
Brenna, what does that make you feel when you're hearing David talk about all of this?
Just slavery in general? Or what is your...
Yeah, slavery in general, hearing about, you know, just, because I looked at some of the statistics and saw that 80% of these victims are children. And so what does that make you feel or think?
It's really a crime by everybody. I mean, we are all a part of this. And sure, we're not the ones that are actually enslaving those people, but we're the ones that are allowing it to happen. I mean, I think about in the western coast of Africa, on all the cocoa farms that they have there, 40% of the chocolate that is in today's global market has slave labor in its production. And just how, like, you know, every time we have chocolate bar, 2 times out of those 5 times, we are consuming slave-made goods. And just how important it is for us to realize what we're doing, what we're purchasing, what we're consuming, what our consumer life is like, and then responding to that and telling companies what we will not accept and why we will not accept it, and telling everybody else why it is important not to buy those things. And so obviously when it comes to like the LRA in Uganda, there's not much we can directly do besides like lobby our government and you know, support petitions and just raise awareness. But for me, the big kicker is we have so much power in our everyday lives. Like, where does the cotton come that is in our clothes? Slave labor. Like our Oriental rugs that are on the ground, a vast majority of those are made in India and involve slave child labor. So for me, it's just so important. It's just such a crime against humanity what these people are doing, taking these young soldiers, these young children, forcing them to be soldiers. It's just so horrible, and we are so easy to ignore it. I can't count how many people I've told about the slavery that is involved in bananas or chocolate or whatever, but just because of prices or whatever, they so easily just ignore that and buy the product anyway because it's easy and it's convenient, and they don't have to be directly confronted with those people. In Honduras doing the bananas, in the Ivory Coast with the cocoa beans, or in other places in Asia making their clothes. We just disconnect ourselves, and it's easy to do, but we really have to face the reality of what we are buying and what labor is in that.
You know, I think it would be helpful for, you know, the viewers to get an idea of, like, you know, what does it look like? How does somebody actually, you know, become enslaved? You know, so, you know, for example, in Southeast Asia, which many people are familiar that, you know, the sex trafficking industry is, you know, pretty rampant, to say the least, there. And the government often, you know, turns a blind eye because of the amount of revenue that's brought in by the sex trafficking industry. So, you know, for example, you have a family in a rural village in northern Thailand that can't afford to pay their children, you know, can't afford to provide for their children's basic needs. They're living in absolute poverty. They don't have enough food on the table. They might not have adequate shelter or clothing. Their kids can't afford to go to school. You know, it could be somebody from their village, could be somebody else, someone that's visiting the village that comes and says, you know, I can give your daughter a job working at a hotel in the city. You know, here's an advancement. You know, we can send more money. You know, for a family that's desperate, for a family that is lacking options, it sounds like a very viable and often, you know, realistic way to help provide for the rest of the family. So the girl may go with this trafficker, and the family may never see her again. She could be trafficked across borders. You know, she can be brought to the city. She may be left at a home, may never see the trafficker. The trafficker may be a middleman, a finder sort of individual, and the girl may be abused, you know, raped. You know, oftentimes they're raped to the point where they're just so desensitized and degraded. They're in a place of fear, and you think, well, why wouldn't they escape? Oftentimes, you know, they're locked in a room, or they're threatened. They're saying, you know, if you escape, we'll kill your family. I mean, they're so manipulated, and you know, they've been, you know, cases where girls have been electrocuted. I mean, we're talking about just the most evil sorts of conditions that you know, someone could live in. In India, for example, that's often, you know, most of the slavery that we look at, the slavery statistics, is around indentured slavery. So, for example, you may need to pay for your mother's medical expenses, and your mother's medical expenses are $50 or $25. But for somebody whose annual income is $150, that's a lot of money. Where do they get that? So they go to the local loan shark to borrow money. The loan shark lends them the money for grandma's medical expenses, but he charges exorbitant amounts of interest. And then they cannot pay it back, and then they're maybe requested that they send one of their kids to work for him, and then he might give that kid new flip-flops or shoes, and he's charged interest on that, or the family is given a bag of rice and they get charged interest on that. You know, it just continues to compound, and as an illiterate family, often illiterate people, they don't know. And then you can often have generations of family members that are enslaved because of a $50 loan.
Oh my goodness.
So
I can't. I'm listening to this, and what you had stated earlier about a family making a decision to send this child off to work for you know, for whatever reasons, and I can't comprehend that mindset, and I'm not judging it, but as a parent and I have daughters, I couldn't imagine. I think I'd want to die first, but I can't judge that because I'm not in those conditions. You know, talking about getting medicine for grandma or that kind of thing. It's just, it just seems so diabolical, and wondering where, you know, where the government comes to play in all of this. But then you had indicated earlier that the government allows, or they just turn a blind eye
at times
to it. I can't. You've been on the mission field, you said, right? And you've all been on the mission field. What did you see, Diana, when you went to the mission field?
Well, I know we didn't actually go into the smaller remote villages. We worked more with a couple centers that you know, took in women that were in prostitution or, you know, trafficked, and worked with a couple different places that were trying to help you know, counsel, educate. A lot of times, a lot of these women are so they come from such abject poverty that they don't have a lot of skills. And so some of the places that we visited, now I was only there for a couple of weeks, but a couple places we visited, you know, they were teaching cooking skills and how to make, you know, the fancy cakes, you know, because that's a big thing over there, the 5-course meals in some of the cities in Thailand, making jewelry. And, you know, selling it, making good product, so that then the women could then sustain themselves in, you know, in their community, and so they don't have to fall back into that kind of situation. So at least my exposure when we went to Cambodia and Thailand, that's what we got a chance to see, and it was really neat to see some of the things that are happening and going on over there.
David, go ahead. I know you want to jump in here, but I'm thinking too, how do you shift this paradigm? How do you really move this? But
how do you address the issue of human slavery globally? That's a huge issue. I mean, it's the second largest illegal money-making activity in the world, next to the drug trafficking industry. You know, the difference with it is that a human being can be sold over and over again. And we're talking organized crime, we're talking trafficking routes, slave routes. I mean, there's more slaves today than there ever was during the transatlantic slave trade. And it's increasing, with globalization. You look at places like sub-Saharan Africa where absolute poverty has increased over the last 10 years. When I talk of absolute poverty, I'm talking, people that can't afford, basic food, clothing, and shelter. And you'd think with all the millions and zillions of dollars that have gone into doing development, that things would be getting better globally. I think of what Jesus said, the poor will always be with you. And even though he said that, there's a moral imperative for all of us as believers to respond to these issues. So how do you address the global slave trade? I mean, it's multifaceted in its response, and there's a number of ways that NGOs, which are non-government organizations, which are global non-profit organizations, like We International, like World Vision, Compassion International. Many of your viewers sponsor children from those organizations, which are great organizations. But how does an organization address these? I mean, one is, doing economic development in an area that the traffickers also target, doing educational initiatives in the villages where the children are recruited from.
And so how do you scope those areas out? Like, so you're part of this ministry. How do you know where to go? How do you scope that out?
Yeah, that's really being on the ground and, talking with locals, really doing your research on where the high poverty areas are.
So that's one of the biggest characteristics then would be poverty.
High poverty.
Okay.
Yeah, and most of the people that are vulnerable to being trafficked, it's a result of poverty, whether you're looking at, women in, the former Soviet bloc Union, Eastern Europe, which is a huge trafficking area. Right now, girls are being recruited out of there. Or whether you're looking at, Asia or sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, that's the common denominator. I mean, for the most part, that poverty plays a role, that people are vulnerable to slavery because of poverty.
So the government turns a blind eye, but yet you're able to still go in and do this kind of work.
Yeah.
How does that happen? Brenna, were you going to say something? I see you ready to pop over there. And I want to know how you would shift the paradigm, too.
The government, I mean, in a lot of the brothels across, like, Southeast Asia and East Asia and Southeast Asia, all that whole area, and even all over the world, police are a huge group of customers to the brothels. And so, I mean, there's a lot of corruption. Like, slavery is illegal all around the world. And a lot of people, like, get a little nervous at the word slavery, but it is slavery. It's modern day slavery, but it still fills the criteria. These are people who are forced to work without pay under threat of violence, and they are unable to leave, and they are enslaved. And so, yes, it's illegal everywhere in the world, but it still happens everywhere. And so, David kind of talked about, like, what organizations can do, but for me, it's like, what can people do? Like, what can I do in my everyday life that can actually stop the slave trade? And what I mentioned before about consumerism, I think is absolutely huge in everybody's life. It should be, they should know what they are buying and know what it's supporting. But beyond that,
you're talking to an audience of, we are the biggest consumers in this on this globe, right? So that's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I mean, most people eat chocolate on a daily basis, and just understanding what you are consuming and what you are eating, and like what blood has gone into that product, and how important it is to not eat that product. Because when we think about, if we were in the American South, like back in when slavery existed here, like, would we buy those products? No. We know it's slave labor. We would not buy that. We would be appalled.
How can people know, what is a product of slave labor? And
I think the net is just, Googling it. I know I just bought an outfit at a local store and went on to look on the internet and did some research on it, and I returned it back to the store. Because I found out that there was, illegal activity. And I think, you do some research, you find out, and I think, again, education is huge. Letting people know, like what you're doing here tonight, educating and doing the 2-part series that you have is getting the word out there, because I know for me, like I said, when I came to know more about this issue, I felt really horrible, that I'm 37 and I'm just finding out about this, and I think it's kind of a process of figuring that out, and then making conscious decisions to try to make a difference. And it's sometimes those little small steps can make much bigger steps in bringing change about.
Yes.
So
I believe that we're I don't know if they're putting the website up on the screen, and yeah, it looks like they are. So you can get more information about this topic by actually going to the website and doing a little bit of individual personal research. David, I saw you kind of wanting to jump in too as we were talking about this shifting the paradigm, and Brenna's passionate about individuals doing things, but then there is this sort of larger picture. How can we change this in a more global kind of way?
I think one of the things that Brenna mentioned, which was really good as individuals, is contacting our congressmen. I was in Washington this week. I met with a couple of our senators and their congressional staff around some global issues, and it's important. Washington's taking note. I mean, the issue of human slavery is the profile's being raised, and we can end this, which is great. I mean, it's great to think that some child that's spends 16, 20 hours a day rolling cigarettes in India could have a normal childhood, or some young girl in Asia who, at the age of 5 or 6 was abducted and has become, some sort of prostitute where she's forced to perform 10, 15 times a day, and where her childhood has been robbed, where, the Lord could work healing and restoration into her lives, and she could have a redeemed and fulfilled life.
So when your organization goes into those places, what do you tell me what you do? Give us kind of a blow by blow.
Yeah, and we're a young organization, and we feel like one of the best ways that we can respond to the issue is around economic development. So
which is the prevention side.
Which is the prevention side, but which not a lot of people address it. I mean, most of us, are usually looking at addressing the effects. We're all looking at the girls that have, been, rescued, the girls that have been enslaved, or even young boys in places around the world. The other part is, as the girls have gone through counseling and restoration, would be as they transition back into culture, to really provide them either educational loans, educational grants, micro loans, to help them start small businesses, entrepreneurial training, so they can provide, for themselves and their families. Often, many of them have children because of the lifestyle that they've been involved in. We have an aftercare center in Uganda. We just had the first group of 8 women go through. They're all in their late teens, early 20s. They were all have been rescued, and they've all made confessions of Christ. They're all being discipled by a wonderful woman there who, she was a prostitute at one point in her life, got radically saved. She now does outreach into the bar areas, and she disciples these young ladies. She teaches them parenting skills.
Awesome.
And so we'll be heading there in the fall to do some entrepreneur training with the young women.
Are there opportunities for them once they receive this education and this training? Are there opportunities for them to integrate into the society and start making some money? And
Yeah.
okay.
They can have, normal, wonderful, redeemed lives like, all of us that have, come into having a relationship with Jesus. I mean, there's so many things that happen, how our lives change, and
right. They get connected to a church. They get connected to a fellowship. They get other support system is developed for them.
They have a great support system for the most part, I think, usually, and it's like all of us. We make our choices and how involved we're going to be, or how much fellowship we're going to have, and how we're going to walk out this faith that we have.
Right.
So, but
Diana, talk about your pictures, your paintings. Would you please?
Okay. Well, Barb, I was looking at the situation, and a lot of times you can look at the situation and it can feel very hopeless
overwhelming.
and overwhelming, and just being in the position of being a teacher, and not at this time being able to go out on the mission field and actually direct one-on-one type of thing, and just looking, how do I respond,
But Diane, I also want to say that you are in the mission field.
Yes, I am. Yes.
And I think it's important. God calls us to all do different kinds of things.
Right.
And so I remember hearing a minister say once that there are treasures in hidden places, and we're all over. So it's awesome that you're doing both of these things. Yeah. But go ahead.
No, and thank you for saying that, because it's true. But I wanted to respond to this because it's so close to my heart. So like I said, what we did, myself, David, and the other artist decided to do a series of paintings. And so when we got back from our trip, myself and the other artist painted for a year, and she was an art student and I was teaching, so I would paint every Tuesday night, and then sometimes on the weekends, and then I took last summer and worked on the paintings. The whole goal out of the paintings, again, like I said earlier, is to bring awareness around the subject of what's happening globally and around us, and to allow people to get a heart, because a picture speaks 1,000 words. Photography, painting, and it's universal. Even if we didn't speak the same language, a painting could speak, so much. And so our goal and hope were to, try to call people out to wanna help, to wanna respond, to wanna do something. And we've just started. We've only had a couple shows, and they've been kind of one-time, one-night things. We're hoping to do more. Also, too, I've been able to bring my paintings into different areas. I don't know if you've ever heard of Master's Commission, but it's like a discipleship training school, and I did a 6-hour training there and teaching around the subject with a lot of the stuff that David's given me and the stuff that I've studied over the last number of years, and then the paintings, and been able to teach around them. Around the subject, and then have times of prayer and intercession for these situations, because obviously the women aren't in front of us, and sometimes it's nice to have that picture and that story behind the pictures.
David?
Tell them about, why don't you pull that up?
We can show
Tell them
this.
about the title of
let me hold it up in front of the
should
camera.
Should I
here.
hold it up, or should
I think maybe you could. They might be able to get it from there.
The title of the exhibit.
Can you see it?
Tell them about the title of the exhibit.
Okay. The title of the exhibit is called Every Man's Daughter, and the whole goal around it was to, and this was the actual painting that kind of is the theme of our art show, and to think about that we live in a global community, right? And if we were to look at, especially men, because my heart is a little bit more around women and children issues. My heart just bleeds for just the children that are trafficked annually, daily. And just if we were to look at women and children as our mothers, as our daughters, as our sisters, I think a lot of times you just think about, your relationship with your family, and you can pick on your daughter, you can pick on your sister, whatever, but no one else can, and I think a lot of times if a lot of these people who were the perpetrators looked at these women with eyes of this is my family, this is my sister, this is my friend, and to care for her and to look after her and to not exploit her and take advantage of her. So a lot of our artwork is around sexual exploitation. And so to bring awareness around that subject, and then this
awesome.
painting was, I wanted to represent, multiple cultures in it, because it affects everyone, you know. So.
David, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second.
Can I put this
these are
picture?
beautiful. Yeah, you
Down.
can put it there, and I know that there's another one that's right in front of us here. I just want to put you on the spot for a second. We have I want to make sure we get this in there.
Yeah.
The depravity of mankind.
Yeah.
Why do we do this? Why do people think that they can enslave someone like that?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. About, well, like you said, the depravity of man, that we are depraved, and our sinful nature is such that we often don't care about our fellow man. We just care about what we care about, and
So if someone says to you, "Well, man is basically good,"
yeah,
you've got an argument for
you know
them.
what yeah, well, you know what, I think that's just a crazy statement when you really think about it, because you don't have to look too far to see that we're not really basically good, that we do need rescued from our sinful selves, and that's why Jesus came, because we need rescued. And anybody who spends much time looking at their own lives and their own hearts realizes that I can't clean this mess up on my own,
Right.
that I need help. This issue is huge. I love the title of this painting and this exhibit that Diana and Stephanie, we've been adding other artists to it that have taken this issue on. Every man's daughter. It doesn't, the issue of trafficking doesn't just happen to women. It does happen to boys, but mostly women and girls are the victims. And there's a real lacking of men to respond to this issue of human trafficking, and which is sad, because like Diana said, it is to people's daughters and mothers and sisters, and they're beautiful, and when sometimes people have strange theology around men and women, but I don't think guys need to look long to see that women are really the beautiful part of God's creation. When they look at men and women, and they're of equal value, and they need to be somebody needs to fight for them, and I think that God is awakening particularly the evangelical church recently to respond to these issues of human trafficking, human slavery. I know many of the viewers probably have seen the movie Amazing Grace, the story of William Wilberforce and his battle against slavery. Well, slavery is not over, unfortunately. And it's alive and well, and it's a growing thing that we need to take a look at.
What's next for We International?
Next, as far as addressing human trafficking, we are working on an arts therapy, arts ministry program that we can bring into the aftercare centers to help aid in the healing and restorative process that these women and girls are going through. So the arts are such a beautiful way to communicate cross-culturally. It's a great way to process the things that are going on. I think we can provide some great tools to the aftercare centers that are out there that are working. Those workers work long hours, emotional hours. It's very labor intensive to deal with all the emotions and all the things that how these girls have been so abused. So to provide them with some tools that way, and allow a lot of the people around We International that want to respond an opportunity to go and minister to these girls is something that I think we can do with our arts therapy.
Yeah, I just feel this in my heart to say, and this even goes beyond the trafficking issue, but for any woman out there that has been abused in any kind of way, I'm grateful for the men that God has raised up who have a compassion and who have the heart of Christ, who have the Father's heart to minister to those women. I just came off of a Women of the Word conference, and the whole concept of that conference was started by a man who had a father's heart for women. And so I want women to know out there, women who may be angry with men because of sexual abuse or physical abuse or other, that first of all, Jesus is a loving man. He is God incarnate, and he loves you so much that he was willing to come as a man and to lay down his life so that you could be made whole. And that's what this is about. That's what We International is about, and they work internationally. But for those of you that are listening who may have experienced any kind of enslavement or bondage in your life or pain, and specifically to women, God wants you to know that he loves you, and that by the stripes, by the very pain that he took on his own back, the whippings, that by those you can be made whole. And I just felt to do that for just a second. I want to ask you, Brenna, you're going to India, and what do you want to do there other than learn Hindi? What do you want to do?
Well, that year we'll just be learning Hindi, but we've discussed possibly starting a We International India. And I'm very, a lot of people are responding to this issue with great heart, just go kind of, and we'll go in the world and kind of do whatever they think that the world needs in that area. But I'm really committed to not doing that, and to actually going there and being well researched and knowing who these people are and what they need, and not just assuming that I know them better than they know themselves. A lot of Orientalism has gone on in this process of abolition and fighting the sex slavery movement, and it's really, really important not to do that. And so my dream, hopefully I will end up in India doing something to try and stop or decrease the slave trade.
It's important. It's important not to come in as we do anything overseas in some paternalistic type of approach to things. You know, because often as Westerners we often think that we have the answers, or we're somehow enlightened, and it's by God's grace that we are where we are. And for us to come alongside, like Brenna said, and just be learners, to serve, to love, and to come alongside and, you know, figure out a way to help and make a difference.
I appreciate you saying that, because the word says, to whom much is given, much is required. I remember driving up to my home and thinking, God, why is it that I can drive up to a nice house and have a couple of cars that are paid for, and a house that is paid for, and yet 2/3 of the world is in poverty? And the Lord spoke to my heart that I bless this nation, that it would be a blessing. And I pray always that our nation can be in that position to bless and you know, and serve others. Some other remarks. Did you want to say something, Diane?
One thing I wanted to comment, just to piggyback kind of on Brenna and what David are saying, and what you just said, is, you know, I guess I look at myself as I'm just a normal person with, you know, I mean, God's given me gifts and everything, but that there is something that we can do and that we can respond to. And I think about like if there was a illegal child labor down the street in my hometown, Wanakee, and I knew it was going on, I would do everything to stop it. Because I'm seeing it, it's visible. And I think that's part of the problem, is that a lot of this goes, you know, it's not visible. And so you can easily, out of sight, out of mind. And when we are reminded of that it's not far from us, even though we can't necessarily
right.
see it with our visual
That's
eyes,
right.
that we can, you know, get involved and can, you know, make the changes and do those kinds of things. And
David,
Yeah.
we have to pray.
Okay.
I want you to close us in prayer.
I'd love
in
to.
the last few moments. Would you do that, please?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Folks that may be listening to you right now, you can look in that camera and pray.
All right. Yeah, let's just pray. Lord, we know that you are the God that rescues, that you are the God of light, that Jesus, you came to redeem and rescue the lost. And Father, I just pray for all those that are watching, the things that you're stirring in their hearts to see people rescued and redeemed. Maybe those that need rescued right now, Lord. Maybe those that aren't even enslaved, but just feeling a burden to be new, to be whole, to be in relationship with you. Lord, I just ask that you would come now and touch their lives. Father, I pray that you'd move throughout this earth, Lord, that you'd awaken your church, Lord, that you'd call your church to rise up and to respond and not just say this is a sad topic, but Lord, to respond, Lord. You have called us all to respond to you and your word.
Yes.
And Father, right now I just ask that you'd help us to all to do something.
Yes.
In
Thank you.
Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
When I was a little girl, I dreamed of going to school and then finding someone to love, to have a family. That was my dream when I was a little girl. Then I was forced to become a prostitute at age 13. My mother died when I was very young. My stepmother was mean. She would beat me and refuse to give me food. So I left my father's house to find work. When I arrived in the big city, a woman said she can give me a job at her house. I was very happy to have some work and a place to stay. But at this woman's house, men would come. If I tried to refuse, the woman would beat me or shock me with electricity. And there was always someone watching, so I could not escape. In this house, I was one of 15 girls. After 2 years, I convinced the woman to let me go so I can find my father and stepmother. When I found them, they despised me and told me to leave. For 3 days and nights, I slept in the fields along the road without any food. Hungry and alone, I sat near a garden and waited for men to come to me. After several customers, I had enough money to get some food and a bus ticket. In the city, a man found me and said he had a safe place for me to stay. Then he sold me to another brothel. When I was a prostitute, I was required to have 15 men each day. If I did not, I would be beaten and refused food. This is the story of my life. I am now 24, and I am dying from AIDS. One of my greatest fears is that when I die, no one will come to my burial. When I talk to God, I ask him to give me peace.
I believe slavery exists today, yes.
People work without having the freedom to leave whenever they want to.
From what I have read, I think it does. In this country, I don't believe it does.
There are over 27 million people enslaved around the world at this very moment.
It's called human trafficking.
I couldn't even tell how many people are trafficked. I have no idea.
Human trafficking is one of the largest criminal industries in the world, next to narcotics and weapons trafficking. It is also the fastest growing criminal industry.
Human trafficking, I believe, is just the current term for slave trade.
I think about people being misled, brought to a different country from where they come from, and then misused and abused.
Basically selling of human beings for either labor or for sexual reasons.
human trafficking is all acts related to the recruitment,
transport, sale, or purchase of individuals through force, fraud, or other coercive means.
For the purpose of economic exploitation.
In terms of what parts of the world, I can say probably third world countries are most affected.
Africa, Eastern Europe.
Some parts of Malaysia.
I think it happens in India somewhat. I think it happens in Africa.
According to the 2007-2008 U.S. TIP report, 14,500 to 17,500 people are trafficked through the U.S. each
year, and an additional 300,000 American minors are at risk of becoming sex traffic victims.
It doesn't touch my life personally. Do I think it affects me emotionally when I hear about it? Yes, that's terrible.
Though it is believed that this figure could be 10
times greater due to trafficking secrecy and subversive nature.
The two main kinds of trafficking in the Chicago area are slave labor and sex trafficking.
The so-called legitimate establishments in Cook County, such as
massage parlors and strip clubs, often serve as a front for trafficking and
involve victims of the sex trade.
Anonymity of the internet is bolstering trafficking's growth.
Websites enable traffickers to better conceal victims' identities.
Trafficking sales conducted online are often finalized in local hotel rooms.
Chicago and the surrounding area
is an international hub
for human trafficking in the United States.
Look closely around you.
It's happening here.